So, yeah, today let's talk about Solomon. Now, again, we had this discussion earlier in the stream, and you guys were sitting there saying, like, oh, Cad, you can't claim credit for this. I've been predicting Solomon coming back into the game as a playable character, as the Grand Caster, as, like, a lot of the stuff for a while now. I don't want to make myself sound too smart. There's nothing really smart about it. This was just, to me, almost like an inevitable foregone conclusion. How they've done it, though, and we're not really going to talk about it, but how they've done it is certainly an interesting way. And I definitely like to see what they've done with the Grand Duel. But Solomon is coming to us as the game's arguably first 5-star welfare. The reason I say arguably first is because we have had SSR selectors in the past. We have had MASH, who's gotten promoted to a 5-star. So he's technically not the first, but this one kind of comes out of left field. This is a servant that a lot of us would have probably rolled for, and certainly as a 5-star with a pretty cracked kit, this is actually pretty abnormal that they're just going to go ahead and give it away. I think a lot of this has to do with the developers wanting to really promote the finale to Part 2 story. They really want to get players in and kind of make sure that everybody has a fair shot at this and give somebody a really good character, assuming you've managed to get all the way through the Grand Duel. Now, that's going to be the problem. In order to unlock Solomon, you need to be able to do the Caster Grand Duel, which requires you to be able to do the prologue for the finale, at least to start it. Once you've done the first rung of the prologue, then you have the unlock of the Caster Grand Duel that has just come out. You'll have to complete your Grand Caster, beat the final challenge fight at the end, and then you will be able to complete the last kind of pip of the prologue there. Once you've completed the last pip, then you will get your Solomon welfare. From there, where you're going to go is you're actually going to go to the Evocation Festival shop. You will be able to buy everything that you guys need for him there. Admittedly, it is an interesting thing at how they've done this one because he doesn't actually have Ascension materials like a normal welfare does. Instead, he has just normal Ascension mats like a normal unit does. But it is what it is. I think the devs just still want to say, hey, look, we're giving you this 5-star for free. You're still going to have to use some of your resources in order to level him. So you can definitely get all of his copies with the Evocation Festival leaves. You can get all of his coins that way. So you won't have to worry about either of those two considerations. But again, you are going to have to spend some resources in order to get him up and online. Now, Solomon is coming to us as an AoE buster, not caster. That is to say, he's going to be a pretender instead. But the way he's going to function is pretty interesting. We're going to go over his kit here in a bit and talk about all of his possibilities and things that you guys really need to pay attention for. Because again, this is a free unit. All of you guys should eventually get this, and this is definitely one you guys are going to want to make sure that you're getting the most out of. So, as we look at Solomon, you guys can see right off the rip, as a pretender, he only has about 10k attack. For a 5-star, this is definitely low. I don't think it's going to be that concerning because, again, you are guaranteed NP5 of this guy. You're definitely going to get a pretty high-octane offensive servant out of this. Certainly, looking at his HP, he's at about 14k. I maybe would have liked to have seen this a little bit higher just because the attack stat's so low, but I think they're a little bit worried about Solomon being a little bit too cracked, so it is what it is. He himself is Earth Attribute in the form that we summon him here, and he is Star Absorption of 102, Star Generation of 20%, and NP Charge Attack of 0.77. As a buster-based unit with 2 buster cards in his deck, 0.77 is actually pretty darn good because he still has the arts cards. And his NP Charge defense rate, which is the amount he's going to get per hit, is 3%. His death rate's 18%, which is a little bit below average. And his alignment is Chaotic Evil, so that means he will have a little bit of synergy with other Chaotic Evil buffing units, a la Doman. His gender is going to be male, and his basic traits are going to be Defender, immune to Pigify, King, or the Sovereign trait as I like to call it, Servant, and weak to Inima Elish. So he doesn't actually have a whole lot of traits here to kind of exploit or kind of synergize with. That's maybe one of the concerns about him, but I'd argue that it's not really too big of a deal. Now again, looking at the deck, as we already mentioned, he does have double buster, double arts as his primary deck here, and he does have the singular quick card, but all of his hit counts are average or higher, and actually there's some pretty nice standouts here with the arts cards both being 1 hit above average, the quick card being 2 hits above average, and the extra attack also being a hit above average. So that means the extra attack is going to perform quite well for him nicely as well there. So as we look at his first skill here now, moving on to his actual kit, this is where things start to go kind of crazy for welfare. You guys can see he charges his own NP gauge by up to 100%. Means you don't need to start him out with any amount of starting charge. You don't have to do really too much to him at all. You can see he recovers the party's HP every single turn for 3 turns by up to 2,000. So again, he's just going to kind of have some latent healing there. He's going to grant the party critical star regeneration buff for 3 turns. And again, that is up to 10, and that is, I believe, per ally there. So really nice in that regard. He's going to get a whole lot of stars out of this. But he's got a lot of like power creep going on here. We just had some really nice stuff from other units already baked into his kit. He's going to increase the party's critical damage for 3 turns by an additional 30%. Not the greatest, but hey, listen, you've already got a Buster unit that's providing a shit ton of stars and charging himself, and you're going to be buffing him with other Buster supports that also do that similarly. So like him having even more crit damage here is just icing on the cake. The problem with the skill is it's going to be on a 7-turn cooldown. So the big priority for your appends with Solomon is going to be his 5th append. That will lower this skill's cooldown to a 6-turn cooldown at a Lord rank. Therefore, that's going to allow you guys to be able to double this up with a double Koyanskaya setup. Definitely nice, as that will mean that he can have 2 100% charges in a 3-turn duration, which is frankly just kind of insane. It's, you know, very similar to how we've been operating now with Arcuid, and her getting the 5th append really helped her out in that regard. So same deal here. Even if you somehow didn't have enough, you'd still be able to 3-turn with him due to him being a 100% charger, but I highly recommend investing in that 5th append. The second skill here is Seal of Solomon. This one's going to overcharge the party's NP by 1 stage 1 time over 3 turns. This is going to increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns by up to 50%. So again, if you're using them alongside, say, someone like Oberon, boom, there you go. There's a whole lot of extra NP damage upscaling. If you're using him on top of that with something like a Black Grail, that's even more. You're going to get a whole lot of compounding, just really insanely scalable stuff here. He will increase the party's debuff resistance, interestingly enough, for 3 turns by 30%. This is a sizable amount. This will make it quite a bit harder, especially if you're using units that already have pretty decent debuff resistance, for a debuff to actually land on them consistently. So it's definitely a nice little kind of hidden gem here baked into his kit for challenge purposes. But then we get to an interesting effect where he will grant himself NP refund on use buff for 3 turns that is unstackable. So this means even if you double up the skill, you're not going to get it twice. The way this skill is going to work is that basically whenever a caster ally except himself uses their Noble Phantasm, it will charge his own gauge based off of the consumed MP value of the user. So he's functionally going to get refunded half of their Noble Phantasm. So let's say you're using him alongside Merlin and you're in this challenge fight and Merlin just manages to throw out his Noble Phantasm in order to heal the party. Well, even if he's at the first rank there of just 100%, that's still right there with Merlin using his 100% charge to use Noble Phantasm. That's going to give Solomon half of that. So he'll get 50% charge based off of that. If Merlin instead was at, say, 200% for the second rank, that would give Solomon half of that. So that would be 100% charge for Solomon right there. A little bit, Solomon, especially depending on how you use him, is going to basically end up in a scenario where he almost has too much charge in certain scenarios. So I think this is an interesting way of handling it. I'm really surprised by how they gave this, but yes, the maximum would be having somebody at 300% charge, them using their Noble Phantasm, and then Solomon is going to get half of that. So he's going to end up getting 150% charge. Not that you would necessarily need it, but it is an interesting effect. And again, it does last for multiple turns. I think the interesting aspect here is that if you're using assassins and you're using like Koyanskaya and you're using Oberon as, say, another pretender, they're not going to count as caster allies. So you're gonna have to be a little bit careful about who you use him with if you want this sort of thing to work. That being said, you have units like, say, Shakespeare out there that have gotten a really nice support buff recently. that are a caster, that are buster buffers, so you could use them alongside Solomon. You could get a pretty decent amount of longevity here. But this is definitely going to be something that will help counteract, like, say, not having the Koyan Skayas in the party to reduce cooldown. So that is what that is. For the third skill here, now moving on, Solomon is going to basically get Arts and Buster Performance up for 3 turns by 30% each at rank 10. So again, recalling back to his deck, he's got double Buster, double Arts cards in his deck. His Noble Phantasm is Buster itself. This is just really nice. You're getting a whole lot of coverage here. It's covering 80% of his deck and basically going to cover his Noble Phantasm as well. But it doesn't stop there, as he's also going to get an increase to his own damage and defense against 7 Knight class enemies. Doesn't have to be a servant particularly here. This is just a extra power mod of 30%, up to 30% I should say, and an extra defense up of up to 30% against the base 7 classes of the game. That is really nice. That's going to make him very effective, and even though he's a pretender and he's already pretty much, you know, decently effective against the Knight Triangle, the Cavalry Triangle, or sorry, not the Cavalry Triangle, withstanding the Knight Triangle of enemies there that he's effective against, this actually will just kind of stack on top of that, and it will make him at least semi-effective against, you know, the Cavalry Triangle as well. So it is an interesting thing to see, but obviously this is something that I think they're just trying to really portray him as being strong. Taking a look at his passive skills, again, we definitely have Territory Creation D in here. We have Item Construction, which doesn't do anything basically. Clairvoyance D for increased critical star generation rate of 10%. This will help him out a little bit more in that regard, especially because his critical star gen rate wasn't too terrible. And then Independent Manifestation E that increases his own crit damage, instant kill resistance, and mental debuff resistance there. That's definitely nice. Now, moving on from this, we can definitely get to the append skills here, and I've already mentioned the importance of getting the 5th append on him. I think that's going to be a big one. 4th append certainly could stack with that additional crit damage he's already providing and could potentially double up on. So instead of having, like, say 60%, you could have up to like 90% for himself, 60% for the rest of the party just off of his own buffs. So definitely the 4th append can be a good one. The 3rd append here being anti-caster attack damage aptitude. This is something, again, he does have that semi-effectiveness, but with him as a pretender, I'm not sure you're necessarily going to want to use that. This one may be the odd man out when it comes to appends. The mana loading append, though, ironically enough, won't necessarily have a lot of use. It's kind of like getting mana loading on someone like Arcuid. Yes, you could do it. Yes, it might have some applications, but ultimately, it's not going to be the most useful of appends due to the fact that he is a 100% charging unit. And then again, looking at his first append here, the extra attack finesse, obviously with him having a really good extra attack with hit counts there, this actually can be a really, really nice one for him to get. So for me, I recommend the 5th append and probably the 1st append, maybe the 4th append, but if you're running low on coins, I think the 2nd and 3rd are the ones that you guys can do away with. Taking a look at his Noble Phantasm, again, it's Buster AoE 3 hits. It's going to remove all enemies' buffs activating first. So this will remove everything, literally every buff that an enemy has on it, unless that buff has the white box around it. So if you're in like a challenge fight or a story fight where there is a gimmick, those buffs that have white boxes around them cannot be removed. That is unfortunate, but everything else that an enemy does, that can be removed. So this is really nice because it's going to end up getting rid of, you know, obviously things like Invuln Pierce, but it could also get rid of things like Guts and stuff too that's really annoying and going to stop you from doing your job. Particularly, you know, again, things like Solid Defense or Invulnerability or Evasion, all of that's going out the window with this type of Noble Phantasm. It's a really, really good thing for him to have. And again, he is welfare, so now everybody can potentially get this at some point in the game. From there, he'll deal damage to all enemies, and in a odd move here to me, they actually made the Buster Resist down happen after his damage. I feel like they were on a roll of just making him super cracked and giving him a ton of extra good stuff, so they didn't put this before damage. So instead, this is after damage goes out. He will have Buster Resist down of 20% for 3 turns, but if he is hitting the same enemy over and over again, and with the amount of charge he has rolling around in his comps, this is not going to be a bad deal for him. He will then, from there, charge his own NP gauge by 20%. So the man just shits refund and has a ton of extra charge for him. So it's really, really a good thing. And then as we look at his overcharge effect, this is potentially the use of having extra scalability and extra charge on hand, is that he does have a damage scaling and increasing overcharge, which is that it increases his NP damage for 1 turn before damage goes out by a base of 10%. But if you get overcharge ranks, 20, 30, 40, 50%. So it's nice scalability there. And again, remember, he does have overcharge in his own kit. So at least the first time you do this, you are going to get 20%. Problem is, it's a little bit front loaded, so it is what it is. So again, going back and looking at that skill there, basically, as long as you have this with the 5th append unlocked and Lord, you could double the skill up, so that means you'd get it back on the 3rd turn. So you wouldn't have to worry about it being popped on the 1st turn. But no, it would not necessarily be something you could have like on turns 2 and 3, unfortunately. But still, a really nice damage scaling overcharge, exactly what we want to see. So to me, again, Solomon's got a really, really nice kit for this sort of thing. Let's talk about charge scenarios for him. And we don't really have to go over too much. Again, like we said, the only real requirement here is going to be a Pen 5. Yes, that's maybe a tall order for some people that are newer to the game, but I do think this is a really, really like just no-brainer one that a lot of people will just go ahead and unlock. This will just allow him to function at a very high capacity. He'll have 100% charge right off the rip for himself, but he'll be able to get it back again. So realistically speaking, you're not using everybody here for the charge necessarily. A lot of this is just going to come down to doing what you want to do. And you can see, like, even though he has 100%, we're basically going ahead and just using a Koyanskaya cooldown reduction here in turn 1 because we don't need the charge from it. So there's really no downside to doing so, and it definitely is an interesting thing. But as we look at that, you guys can definitely see just the sheer amount of like overkill of charge that Solomon has. And this is an easily completable 3-turn. You can do it with any amount of CEs, anything equipped that you want. So there's really nothing that you have to really try. Yeah, and to be fair, he's not somebody that like new players should really be getting. So it makes sense that he's going to be kind of cracked in that regard. Taking a look at Solomon's damage numbers. These are just his raw numbers under his own power. This does not include anything like a like craft essence equipped or support casters coming into play. So it is what it is. Again, looking at this, I think you guys could see we can guarantee the 5th copy, assuming you have the evocation leaves. Looking at that, he's only at about 47k, but this is neutral. So Pretender, you're going to get a little bit of effectiveness. And this does not include his power mod, which is over here at about 55.8k against a neutral enemy, which is kind of an odd statement to make, but again, it is what it is. But you guys can see this is about how much scalability. So you do get a nice, like, sizable bump up there in terms of performance. And it is interesting to denote that these numbers will only get better as we put him in an actual composition. So let's take a look at that. Solomon with 2 times Koyanskaya, Oberon, and a level 100 Black Grail. This is pretty much his, like, idyllic scenario here, is he's just going to get a ton of capability out of this. Now, looking at that, looking at our NP5 numbers, because we don't need to calculate anything else, you guys can see obviously a little bit pedestrian there, wave 1 and wave 2, still solid, but nothing like too crazy. But by wave 3 with that Oberon spike, man is just going to be popping off. He's going to be having a metric ton of damage output rolling out. So at 571k, these are still neutral numbers, but good lord, this guy is going to be able to pump damage. And at NP5 with his power mod active, still neutral numbers, but with the 30% power mod added on, 628 now. And then if we have man attribute power mod from the Koyanskayas, it's going to bump it up to 733. And if he has both, all the way up to about 800k. These are not like the strongest damage numbers in the game, not even close to it, but these are still solid. And this is still a guaranteed NP5 5-star unit that you guys are getting. So definitely really nice to see. But let's see how this stacks up against, you know, a couple of like hand-picked selections here. So I just asked Avalon to put together some stuff for me to kind of show this stuff off. But as you guys can see, we do have a couple of options here. We're going to start out with Lartoria because Lartoria, again, as I've told chat many times here, is actually our strongest AoE Lancer now due to the waiver buff that has happened, plus Artoria's own buffs that have happened to her in the Lancer category here. You guys can see she's kind of sitting there at NP1 at about 446k by the end of wave 3. If you have power mods coming into play here, you get a lot more scalability. You also have Koyanskaya being able to provide man attribute, so there is a whole lot of scalability there to go on. But it is interesting nonetheless to see the actual like damage output there and how that's going to stack up against Solomon's 571k. And actually, I think that number right there in the bottom right of NP1 is actually incorrect. But regardless, again, if you bump it up to NP2, all of a sudden you're competitive and even just better raw than Solomon's best numbers. So we're kind of seeing that exact same dichotomy already of like Solomon NP5 really good, very competitive with our 5 stars that are even like really powerful right now. Problem being, we're comparing an NP5 to an NP1. So let's take a look at another one. Here's Ace, aka Tonalico, for you guys. And you guys can see she's also somebody that really wants that 5th pin. We're going to use 2 times Koyanskaya of Light, Oberon, level 100 Black Grail for her as well. And obviously NP1 there, you're only getting 357k. This is a caster, but she is sort of the best caster out there at this time. You have man attribute coming in really strong for her, and then the evil niche and the combination of both, so she can outscale Solomon if the cards are right. And certainly at NP2, boom, there you go. She's already a lot more competitive with him. Taking a look at God Juna, you do have a similar deal, except now we're dealing with cranking. Now, God Juna, probably at this point, I think if we're starting to compare outside of his class, could use a buff. I think in his class, he's still really strong, but I think there's a lot of people that want to say like, okay, look, he doesn't have the utility that someone like Morgan Le Fay has. We have some pretty nasty giants in that one, like Summer Ibuki, so maybe God Juna could use something. And I think these numbers are interesting because obviously, you know, as a Berserker, you're effective against just about everything. You're not full effectiveness, but you're at least 1.5 times effective. So you can take each of these numbers, multiply that by 1.5, but you can kind of do that the same as well if we're talking about the night classes that we're up against for the Pretenders. So definitely some interesting stuff here in terms of his damage performance, but no, he's not necessarily going to hold a candle to Solomon straight up. That is an interesting thing to see and to note, is that Solomon's already coming in stronger than someone like, say, God Juna. If you compare to Tiamat, Tiamat actually could potentially lose out to him, and that's kind of a crazy statement to make because Tiamat's one of the game's strongest units. But it's not factoring in, obviously, like man attribute from Koyanskaya, but similarly, you know, Solomon can double dip into that too, so there's definitely some competitiveness. But as we start looking at MP2, Tiamat just immediately outscales him. So it's a similar deal. It's like if you start getting more MP levels of some of your stronger units, they're just going to be able to outdo Solomon. But not everyone's going to be able to outdo Solomon just due to the kind of disparity that we have amongst 5 stars. Looking at Olga, Olga's another beast unit that's come out that has effectiveness against a lot of stuff. So I figured she'd be a decent comparison here. On top, you guys can see Merlin, Koyan, and Oberon with a level 100 Black Grail. At the bottom, it's a pen 5 with Koyan and 2 times Oberon. And you guys can see the numbers are pretty samey across the board. But either way, they are at least going to be competitive with Solomon. But again, the second you get to that MP2, raw, she'll get beat by Solomon. But in any of her niches, she will just obliterate Solomon at that point. And then last but not least, I figured, hey, let's compare him to another Buster AoE Pretender, Oberon himself. So Waver coming into the mix and having some interesting buffs now for himself definitely has helped out Oberon a little bit here. But you guys can see Oberon kind of just not really going to be able to hang too much unless he has both man and lawful niche coming into play. Then he'll hang with Solomon. But similarly, as you start getting up to NP2, boom, there you go. NP2 with just the lawful super effective niche for him would be enough. So that's food for thought there. Maybe if you guys have a pretty robust Oberon, it's not something that you need to like heavily invest in Solomon, but Again, Solomon's free. He's a free tool for all of you guys to use, assuming you guys have him unlocked. I see no reason not to use him. How do you guys feel about Solomon? How do you guys feel about the design, the implementation? No spoilers, please, but definitely curious to hear you guys' generalistic thoughts on the matter. And how do you guys feel about the game getting a new 5-star welfare at this stage? So, again, I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. I will see you guys for the next video. Thank you guys for all the support over all the years. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely helps the channel out. Have a good one. A lava attack. Push it to the chicken. Chicken!